Today's show is sponsored by the Electric Vehicle Association. Join up to support the electrification of transport today. And by Energy Sage. Plan your energy independence and insulate yourself from rising energy costs. And by you. Stick around to find out how you can help us remain 100% independent. Welcome to a special episode of TEN Transport Evolved News. Happy New Year. I and the rest of the team are on break right now, and let's be honest, last year was a dumpster fire. And because we are now into 2026, and I hope we don't repeat the problems of last year I thought that there would be no better way to start the year than with a special orange episode. I'm genuinely not sorry about this because, honestly, the US is preparing for its midterm elections, and some of the things said and done by the White House reached levels of bonkers last year that we probably couldn't comprehend a scant decade ago. And I feel it's well worth making a clip show showing just how much damage was done in 2025 by the White House, President Trump, and his pet billionaire. So get something stronger than normal. It is the holidays after all. Sit back and we'll consider this therapy, right? Yelling at the screen is therapy, right? We start today with a story that is US-based, but which will have an impact on the whole world. The official inauguration of Donald Trump as the 47th US president. I know many will be frustrated that we're actually covering this, but given its wide-reaching consequences, we feel we need to. Aside from strongly condemning the actions of Tesla's CEO during Monday's official celebrations, we'd like to focus on the slew of executive orders signed by President Trump on day one. In addition to curtailing and removing civil rights across the nation for many, he announced an immediate withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord and the World Health Organization. He leveraged a legal loophole to declare an energy emergency, granting oil and gas companies free rein to drill on previously protected federal lands for fossil fuels, and announced a halt to leasing federal land for wind or solar farms. And because it was a federal emergency, he declared, he gave the US government and military free power to seize land using eminent domain. He's instructed various agencies to freeze handing out funds previously earmarked for renewable energy and EV projects, and has announced an end to what he called President Biden's EV mandate, which was in fact not a mandate, but a goal of having at least one half of all new vehicles sold in the US be electric by 2030, a goal which wasn't actually legally binding. Many of the executive orders signed on day one are based on thin legal premise, so expect plenty of court cases to come, and we'll try and keep you abreast of them as they happen. We start today's show with the ongoing assault on environmental protections, clean energy, and EV adoption in the US by its recently inaugurated president. Now, in his second week in power, President Donald Trump continued issuing executive orders this week that will, at best, gum up the process of transitioning the world to a cleaner, greener future, and at worst, kill or severely limit the efficacy of programs previously signed into law that aim to reduce emissions, build good resiliency, and a healthier, zero-emission transportation future. At the time of filming this on Thursday, we've seen all kinds of executive orders passed, challenged, and rescinded, and frankly, it's hard to keep up. But what we can say with absolute certainty is that EV charging station deployment and federal funding for EV programs are being severely disrupted. We've already heard from companies worried about their future, and I think cruelty and uncertainty are the point of all of this. Sure, it's happening in the US, but companies that are destroyed here as a result of this particular aspect of the political landscape won't exist anywhere as a result. I am afraid that we're back to the US for this next story, namely the newly appointed Trump-nominated Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, who we've reported on previously, and has just called for fuel economy standards to be lowered. Duffy, who has previously gone on the record as trying to portray EV owners as freeloaders, wrote a letter to NHTSA this week in which he ordered it to consider rolling back US fuel economy standards. His logic was that higher fuel economy standards are less safe and will lead to more deaths because higher fuel standards make for more expensive cars and thus more people will be driving around in older vehicles. He also reiterated that he wants to end all EV subsidies and says lower EV sales will help customers and the auto industry. There's no mention, of course, of the environmental impact and safety risks of driving less efficient vehicles, and I should also note here that there's no real data to suggest that making more efficient vehicles drives the price up. If that were the case, only fuel-efficient vehicles would be more expensive, and last time I looked, all vehicle prices have increased over the last decade. Our first story today deals with the immediate effect of the cancellation late last week in the US of millions of dollars set aside for EV charging. Allocated under the previous administration's NEVI funding program, the White House announced an immediate halting of any funding under the program late last week, leaving state officials, EV owners and industry insiders in the dark. While the US Department of Transportation has said funds already allocated will be paid out, that's not what we're hearing on the ground, and with future promised cuts from the White House against all EV and green energy projects, things aren't looking good. The only winner right now is Tesla, which is still getting $400 million from the federal government for armoured Cybertrucks. Actually approved by the previous administration, the Department of Defense quietly changed its just-released procurement budget for 2025 from armoured Teslas to armoured electric vehicles after public outcry. Welcome to the Kakistocracy, folks. While we didn't start today's show with a story from the ongoing political crisis in the US, I'm afraid I'm bringing you one now, courtesy of a threatened 25% tariff on all imported vehicles. The US president, who, whether in jest or in seriousness, declared himself king this week and signed an executive order stating only he and his attorney general are allowed to decide what's legal and what's not, announced that he will likely announce new import tariffs on cars entering the US on April 2nd. He's not said what they will be, but has hinted that they will be likely around 25%. This would, of course, include all EVs, regardless of where they were made, and could include vehicles made in factories in Mexico and Canada, where many US automakers operate facilities. If enacted, it will, without a doubt, affect the entire global auto industry, and EVs will likely be hit hard and early. Sticking with the US, I'm sure many of you will have heard this week that the North American auto industry was thrown into disarray by the sudden announcement of 25% import tariffs on all products entering the US from Canada and Mexico. During his presidential address to Congress on Tuesday, President Trump claimed that the auto industry supported the tariffs, which appears at odds with the actual statements given by US automakers to the press. Shortly after the address, and after what sources state were quote-unquote extensive discussions with the White House, US automakers managed to convince the White House to delay the announced import tariffs on vehicles for another month. But sadly, the damage already appears done, with both customers and dealerships very unsure exactly how much to pay or charge for new cars. As of the time of filming, there have been suggestions that tariffs will be pushed back altogether, but honestly, it's also fudging frustrating, and the stock market seems to have had damage wreaked upon it this week, bearing testament to how screwed things are right now. If you are outside of the US, I am sorry. Some of us did try and warn everyone else. We head to the US next, where the current White House administration is continuing its attack on building a cleaner, more equitable future. The same week, the president publicly endorsed Tesla and claimed he was buying a Tesla from Elon Musk. I should note the president doesn't drive and isn't actually allowed to. The US EPA's new boss confirmed what we had all feared. The agency is full steam ahead on its new target of doing everything but protecting the environment. The agency outlined its new goals, which include rolling back CO2 emission targets for power plants, rolling back tailpipe emission standards for cars, and taking California to court over its tougher emission standards and EV mandates. It also wants to reduce limits on mercury emissions, soot and particulates from industrial facilities, and reduce the figure used for calculating social costs of carbon pollution. It also wants to try and reverse course on long-standing opinion that greenhouse gas emissions are a danger to public health. It gives polluters and oil companies effectively carte blanche and reduces the impetus on businesses to make the switch to cleaner alternatives. I am very angry about this, and I think you should be too, as its effects will be felt globally. We need to stick around in MAGA world a little more with a story that broke last week, just after we had filmed last week's episode. On Friday, Utah businessman, founder, and former CEO of Nikola Motors, Trevor Milton, who had been convicted of defrauding investors of hundreds of millions of dollars by making false statements to investors about Nikola's product portfolio, received a full pardon from the White House. Milton's conviction came after an independent analyst discovered that Nikola had staged a video purportedly showing a Nikola One semi driving down the road under its own power when it was actually just rolling down the hill under gravity. Milton's serial fraud against investors led to a 4-year custodial sentence, which he hadn't begun to serve thanks to a lengthy appeals process and a large bond payment. But while he was out on bond, Milton donated approximately $1.8 million to the Trump 2024 election campaign. And when asked why he had pardoned Milton by a reporter on Friday, President Trump suggested it had been, quote, highly recommended by many people, end quote, and seemed to imply that Milton was prosecuted because of his support for the president. So, what the heck? Life hack, if you get in trouble with the authorities, just tell them you support the president. Fresh from his apparent sabotage of the stock market, President Trump has signed an executive order aimed at forcing the US to increase its use of coal. It's cheap, incredibly efficient, high density and almost indestructible, he said during the signing, calling coal, quote, clean and beautiful, end quote. But science shows coal is one of the most polluting and environmentally destructive energy sources on the planet, and extracting it is more expensive and damaging than solar, wind or other renewables. A day earlier, President Trump signed another executive order instructing Attorney General Pam Bondi to identify and halt any state laws or initiatives that address climate change or environmental protection. The order is likely to face legal challenges, though, since it directly contradicts the states' rights arguments that Republicans have long used, most recently to limit abortion access. But if upheld by the current Supreme Court, which has shown increasing loyalty to president over legal precedent, it could undermine EV mandates, renewable energy targets, and even clean air and water protections. And just to round things out, the Department of Transportation is also working to gut safety emissions and worker protections for the trucking industry. If you disagree with the direction this is heading, now is the time to speak up. We start today with news that the US President has signed into law H.R. 1, aka the One Big Beautiful Bill. In addition to extending tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans and cutting the social safety net, the bill slashes the majority of cleaner, greener, safer, smarter and more equitable policies. This includes everything from climate justice programs to incentives designed to help people make cleaner transportation and energy choices. I made a whole detailed video on this subject earlier in the week, so check it out if you haven't yet. But as of the time of filming, the most important thing I can share is this. If you're planning on buying a new or used EV in the US and you are currently eligible for incentives, you have until September 30th to buy and submit your properly filmed forms, and you also have until the end of the year to do the same with solar. Otherwise, you'll be out of luck. We're going to have a little break in the metaphorical car crash of news and head over to our first ad from our lovely friends at Energy Sage. Energy Sage connects you with local verified solar installers across the US and now heat pump specialists in select markets who really know their stuff and can help guide you through the process of installing solar panels or getting a heat pump installed. Not a homeowner? No worries. Energy Sage can still help you green your electricity by helping you join a community solar program. We used Energy Sage for ourselves when looking for installers willing to help put solar panels on our roof, and their verified pros were knowledgeable and even introduced us to a fantastic credit union to finance the project with low monthly payments. By now, you will have missed the boat on tax incentives, but energy costs are rising at a scary rate and are unfortunately only expected to go up, as today's show has probably demonstrated. So if you want to generate your own electricity and you live in the US, now is the time. Follow the links below to sign up for Energy Sage's free, no obligation service and get the ball rolling today. And if you choose an Energy Sage installer, we'll also receive a small referral fee, so you'll be helping us too. Help the grid get greener, save money, gain energy independence and support the channel. It's a win-win-win-win. We are back to some more clips now, so buckle in, grab a drink, and prepare for more doom. Pillow optional. Speaking of the US federal government, we heard troubling news this week about the EPA's plan to overturn its 2009 finding that greenhouse gases endanger human health. That finding has guided EPA policy for more than 16 years, but the agency is moving forward with efforts to erase it, effectively dismissing the documented impacts of human-driven climate change. Backing this up, a new letter from NHTSA to automakers revealed this week that the government is wiping away all penalties accumulated since 2022 for missing corporate average fuel economy or CAFE targets. This stems from a clause in the recent One Big Beautiful Bill that reduces all CAFE fines to zero while simultaneously cutting incentives and programs aimed at encouraging cleaner vehicles and a move away from fossil fuels. Last week, I told you the US EPA was planning to scrap the 2009 endangerment finding, the rule that says greenhouse gases harm human health. This week, the agency made it official, proposing to eliminate the finding and every regulation built around it. In a partisan press event, officials accused Presidents Obama and Biden of, quote, twisting the law and using, quote, warped science. The new EPA claims it'll save over $1 trillion in so-called hidden taxes, but data from the Energy Information Administration, part of the US Department of Energy, shows that rolling back emissions rules could raise gas prices by more than 76 US cents a gallon. Why? Because dirtier vehicles burn more fuel. The EPA isn't protecting anything now, just polluters' profits. EPA? That's the Enriching Polluters Association to you. If you are in the US, this kind of behaviour from the federal government is becoming de rigueur. But in a week where President Trump rescinded all wind energy areas in the US coastal waters and ordered a sweeping review of all wind turbine permitting nationwide, now is the time to act. As we noted in last week's show, the EPA is trying to erase a 2009 endangerment finding, a foundational ruling that enabled decades of clean air and pollution regulations. If successful, this could gut fuel economy standards, eliminate polluter fines, and unravel environmental protections nationwide. But before the proposed rollback becomes law, there's a legally required public consultation period, and it just opened this week. If you are in the US, you have until September 15th to make your voice heard, and there are virtual public hearings scheduled for August 19th and 20th. Links are in the show notes to help you through this process, and let us know in the comments if you'd like a video on how to effectively make your voice heard by the Enriching Polluters Association. The US White House has finally released the $5 billion in NEVI funding it had held hostage for more than 6 months because politics? Back in February, shortly after taking office, President Trump froze large portions of previously approved funding for green energy and transportation projects, attacking his predecessor and spreading misleading claims about EVs and clean energy. Many questioned at the time whether this was legal, and multiple states sued to get the funds released. This week, the US Department of Transportation finally freed the money, along with new guidance on how it should be spent. Requirements for consumer protections, emergency emergency plans and environmental concerns are now gone, as are rules ensuring stations serve rural, underserved and disadvantaged areas. Maximum distance rules between stations have also been removed, meaning how appropriate the funded infrastructure is will very much depend on individual states. So, if you don't want to hear about the resident Nazi-in-chief, feel free to skip this section. It's totally okay. I'll wait. Still here? Good. Strap in. This week, in addition to trying to erase museum exhibits about slavery, deploying more armed troops to the US Capitol, encouraging ethnic cleansing in Gaza, attempting to remove voting rights from millions of Americans and trying again to ban trans healthcare, and threatening the legal status of more than 55 million legal US visa holders, President Tiny Peepee has instructed the Department of the Interior to deny all future solar and wind projects in the US, both on and offshore. At this point, it seems to mostly affect grid-scale projects, but who knows? And if you are about to rant in the comments that I'm being political, tough titty. We're past quiet compliance. I am deeply sorry to the rest of the world for how hateful and selfish the White House and the US Republican Party has currently been. This week, they even painted over a sidewalk monument in Florida to the victims of the Pulse nightclub massacre. And they did it at night, so nobody would notice. I am so angry and I have no words. State-sponsored hate and disinformation is not and has never been okay. Many have watched in dismay as the US government under President Trump has repeatedly disrupted climate action policies, eliminating incentives for clean energy in vehicles, banning wind farms and more. It is now evident, though, that the US under this administration is likely to accelerate rather than mitigate the effects of anthropogenic climate change. This week, it went up a gear when we learned that President Trump and his cabinet are threatening other countries with increased tariffs unless they abandon climate-friendly policies. As reported by Politico, the White House is lobbying the United Nations International Maritime Organization to block a global carbon emissions tax on shipping, a plan intended to drive the industry toward net zero emissions by 2050. The vote is scheduled for October. Retaliatory tariffs are threatened, making even the satirical depictions like South Park shipping Trump and Satan together seem prophetic. Pun intended. I regularly joke on this channel about being a triple citizen and being ashamed of 2 of those 3 countries I hold citizenship of. This week, that feeling hit harder thanks to the US president, when he wasn't lecturing the United Nations on a broken teleprompter or an escalator his team caused to stop. He told world leaders that climate change is a hoax, renewable energy is a scam, and that trash in Asia somehow reaches the US West Coast in 2 weeks via the ocean. And to make matters worse, the White House kicked off a nationwide freeze this week on all funding for pedestrian and bicycle-friendly programs, light rail, cycle paths, footpaths, and regional rail projects. All of the funding for that will now be redirected to car-focused initiatives. Seriously, if you are a willing, able US citizen, please consider running against this nonsense next year. As the US White House continues its war on anything green, the Department of Energy has published a memo banning certain words internally and publicly. Acting Director Rachel OBBB, who has a history in the oil and gas industry, listed the now verboten terms in a memo. These include green, decarbonisation, emissions, energy transition, climate change, sustainability, clean or dirty energy, carbon emissions, CO2 footprint, and basically anything relating to tax breaks, credits or subsidies. And given the DOE's recent claims dismissing solar and wind power as quote-unquote useless, it's clear things may get worse before they get better. Yes, people, we are living in the mirror universe. Prepare for your moustache. And finally, some news I wish was spooky fun, but which is totally real. The decimation of green transportation and energy projects by the US government under President Trump. Aside from the truly unhinged and unlawful attacks on citizens, civil rights, and even the People's House, the administration has pushed the Department of Energy to cancel $700 million in already approved grants for battery manufacturing projects in the US. This move lays the groundwork for mass layoffs. It also threatens the EV, clean energy, and battery industries across the US. Some firms affected by this change promise to continue regardless, but new data this week shows that $24 billion worth of clean energy programs have already been scrapped in the US this year, a direct consequence of Donald Trump's pro-fossil fuel, anti-climate action stance. Last weekend, 7 million people turned out at No Kings, and analysts say 12 million are needed for a real chance to make a meaningful impact. So if you are able, get involved. The US government has officially published plans to slash fuel economy standards for cars and light-duty trucks. Standing with the CEOs of Ford and Stellantis, President Trump ripped into previous standards set by President Biden, calling them illegal and blaming them for the high cost of cars, even though I, and many watching, will blame unwanted in-car tech for the same. Slashing nearly a third off the 2031 target of 50.4 miles per gallon, the new targets are 34.5 miles per gallon, less than automakers actually managed fleet-wide last year. We're already seeing automakers push away from EVs towards heavily polluting engines like V8s, even when their respective portfolios include more efficient, cheaper engines and drivetrains. And that only signals bad things ahead for everyone. But maybe there is just a little bit of hope for one thing: Japanese K-cars. President Trump says he wants them to be allowed in the US after seeing them on his recent trip to Japan. And given that we are now ruled by presidential whims in the US, well, yeah. You're nearly done with this episode, so if you've watched this far, you have honestly earned my respect. Well done, not said sarcastically. Hopefully you will consider what's been shared as a bit of a motivation to make sure you get involved with your political scene. But first, a word from longtime sponsor, you. For over 15 years, 10 in the US, I and the TE team have been bringing you news on cleaner, greener, safer, smarter, and more equitable transportation and energy. We're not backed by corporations, and we don't have huge production budgets. Our tiny team, 3 full-time and 1 part-time member, work hard every week to bring you well-researched, honest content. Since our inception, we've avoided taking advertorial money, and our videos focus on content, not revenue. When we started YouTube, ad revenue helped us pay our bills, but as YouTube has shadow banned content creators like us from minority communities and AI fluff has sucked up all the ad dollars, we are now 100% reliant on your support through Patreon, Ko-fi and merch sales. And as we drag ourselves over the finishing line of last year and we get ready for this year, and the anti-trans, anti-renewable, anti-EV rhetoric from the US government continues to threaten our ability to even exist, we find ourselves in quite a sticky situation. Now, we do keep ourselves operating on a tight budget, and last year we survived. There was a video about it last week. But in order for us to grow and cover increasing bills for everything from travel to healthcare costs into 2026, we need to ask all of you to help us with a big lift. We need to increase our income by about 20% in the next few months, or we're going to find it increasingly difficult to survive. So if you like our content, please share it with others, engage with us on social media, and if you are able, and I do mean if you are able, consider supporting us from the equivalent of 2 fancy coffees a year. Unfortunately, it's now January, and so we have increased our Patreon tiers, but the good news is that our base level Patreon tier, $1.50, hasn't changed. So there is still time to get in that great support level. And if you do support us, thank you so much. You are very much the reason we are still around. And now, it's time for those last 2 car crash TV clips. Sticking with the US federal government's attempts to make the world worse for everyone except the ultra-wealthy, here's a story that snuck past most people quietly a week or so ago, but is now very much in the spotlight. Just after the Thanksgiving holiday, the federal government renamed the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, a government-supported agency that has existed for more than 50 years and has driven phenomenal levels of renewable energy and clean vehicle research and development. In a brief press release, the government said the facility will now be known as the National Laboratory of the Rockies, a name chosen to reflect its, quote, expanding mission. That's a euphemism for focusing on everything but renewables and clean energy, and I and all of you need to weep for the future of renewable energy research in the US. And finally, some more bad news at the hands of the US administration. Yeah, aside from ramping up tensions with Venezuela, driving up healthcare costs, and having already announced bans on gender-affirming healthcare for kids, the White House did something else this week. It killed climate research. Specifically, Russell Vought, director of the White House Office of Management and Budget, has announced that the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado will be disbanded, calling it, quote, one of the largest sources of climate alarmism in the country, end quote. For those unaware, it was Vought who was the primary author of Project 2025, the tome that President Trump disavowed until he was inaugurated. To say that the NCAR's research has been pivotal to global climate science would be an understatement, and its gutting and the erasure of years of research and knowledge is something that we cannot easily rebuild. If you are a US citizen who voted this particular dictator and his cronies into the White House, I really hope you get a visit from Jacob Marley next week, because fuck, if you won't listen to the living, maybe you'll listen to the dead. And on that note, we're done for today. Thank you for making it through. But before I go, a huge thank you to the Electric Vehicle Association for sponsoring the channel. The EVA has been advocating for electric vehicles since 1967 and remains firmly committed to a cleaner, greener future for everyone. Join the EVA today to find out how to become an EV educator, meet like-minded fans, and get help to make your own transition to electric. Help that includes a low-interest loan program to help finance your next step. Find out more at myeva.org. And thanks to Energy Sage. Follow the link below to plan your own energy-independent future, regardless of whether there are tax credits or not. And thanks to you. If you can, please consider supporting us from just $1.50 a month on Patreon. And remember, supporting us can also include sharing our content, joining our Discord chat room, promoting us on social media, or using our affiliate links, all in the down below. Oh, and for those looking to make one-off donations, don't forget that we also have a PO box and a Ko-fi, both of which are great ways to make one-off payments. We publish every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday here, and every Sunday we drop 2 videos on Transport Evolved Take 2. In closing, I want to thank you all one more time for watching this channel throughout the entirety of last year, and hope that you will continue to watch it through 2026. And as I hinted earlier, I hope that you will consider getting politically active and engaged wherever you are, be it running for office, volunteering for a campaign, or just doing a soul to the polls. It's all important for us to be active participants in the act of democracy, or, as the last year in the US has shown, things get bad very quickly. We're back to normal next week, so if you've missed 10, have no fear, it'll be here this time next week. And in closing, some important words. You're valid, you're loved, you belong, you have a purpose throughout this year. Last year was horrific. It saw more marginalisation, more hate and more othering of people in our lives and our communities, more bans, more threatened deportations and so much worse. And while the person in charge doesn't actually represent a nation or even the majority of people in it, it can be hard to want to carry on. But you made it to 2026, and in order to change history, we need resistance and intentionality. Sometimes stubborn intentionality. Engage in tactical frivolity. Don't surrender to fear, hate or misinformation. And that is as true here in Portland, Oregon, where we are based, as it is anywhere that power and greed seek to crush the will of ordinary people. So don't buy into division and cruelty. Remember that empathy is a skill we must practice daily to preserve our shared humanity. Just like humour, it is an act of radical resistance. Also remember that everyone needs time out, so make sure you unplug, get outside, dive into a good book, go skiing, gardening or running, or do whatever floats your boat. Care for yourself and your loved ones today so that you can return ready to fight for decency, community justice and a better world. Let your light shine, be it in or outside of an inflatable frog costume. Wherever you are, whoever you love, you are not alone. Be an ally, be kind, be the change you want to see. Don't let hate or ignorance win. Happy New Year. And as always, keep evolving.